Hello, this is Ryan Sesney. I'm the gaming director of the JordanCon Gaming Track, and I am here with a very special guest today. If you would be so kind to introduce yourself.
My name is Matt Corley. I'm a freelance game designer, writer, and also a publisher.
How did you get started uh, working in games?
Yeah, so I kind of fell on it or fell into it. I'm a pharmacist by education, so completely unrelated. And I have always enjoyed writing, and I used to do some nonfiction writing and kind of stopped as I kind of outgrew that phase and had gotten back into gaming recently. And through a series of kind of fortunate happenstances, I came to the attention of Wolfgang Bauer of Cobalt Press, and he had a thing on his website that said, if you ever want to write for us, for the web, it's no money, or at least it wasn't at the time. I think it is now. But we are happy to see and give new writers a chance and just kind of see them there and have other folks do the thing. So I sent him an article or two, and those got published. And then while I was going back and forth with the editor of that area, I just mentioned that what I was doing at my home game, which was redoing an old Pathfinder book of their Tales of the Margrave. And he mentioned it to Wolfgang, and Wolfgang asked for a pitch to convert the entire book over to fifth edition D&D, and that's really how it started. So my first paying gig was actually a hardcover book that ended up being a Kickstarter that over 100 grand. I mean, it was just like, boom, it exploded. And then from there, it came to the attention of Sandy Peterson, and I've written or co-written 16 hardbacks for him now. They're all little ones. So for 4-book series, we actually finished the last one today, or at least I finished my part of it today. And then, of course, I do my own stuff as well, which is typically in the horror type mystery genre as well. So a couple books there too.
I see. And out of all your products that you have done, what would you say is the one that you're most proud of?
Ooh, so that's kind of hard, and I'm cheating because I think that's not a good answer. I'm always proud of the project I'm on. Typically most proud of that project because it's the most, I feel like at each instance, I've only been publishing, writing this kind of stuff for about 3 years now. I feel like I'm constantly, or at least I hope I'm improving my product, my presentation, and then what I'm doing. Horror in the Windy City is the one we just finished. I had a Kickstarter. Really, really proud of that one for a couple of reasons. One is it is basically an expansion of my own system, which is a kind of a knockoff of or a hack of D&D 5e. And it's set in late 1800s Chicago, goes over H.H. Holmes and the World's Fair Expo of 1893. That book also has a novella that I co-wrote with Sarah Tantlinger, who's a Brown Stoker Award winner, which is really fun and something I was also really proud of. So, that was something it's a 250-page book that I pretty much owned from beginning to end. I did all the art, did a lot of the editing with my actual editor, and co-writing, had a fantastic group of folks there. But I mean, that was a really big project. We funded the third week of COVID. So when everybody was terrified and had no idea what we were going to do as far as all the crowdfunding things and just everything in general. I mean, nobody knew. So it was a bit of a challenging time, but I had committed, I have over a dozen people worked on that book with me, and I paid them, and they also had bonuses associated with what we did. So I went ahead and took the risk and did it to see if we couldn't, get them a little bit more bonuses, and also just to move forward so that they can work and continue to do those things. So that was something I was very proud of. And then on a different tangent is, of course, Harper's Tale, which is a book I co-wrote, or at least her and I, with my daughter, my youngest daughter. She helped me with the outline. We had 24 people on that one, and that was another crowdfunding exercise. That was a straight D&D book, very, very family friendly. All proceeds for that one went to Friends of Kids with Cancer. At the end of it, we gave them about $12,000 cash and 100 hardback books to do with whatever they want. With. So that was, of course, two very different things I'm proud of. One is the effort, because hard. I mean, working with 25 different people. I mean, it was an enormous project. just coordinating all those different creatives and all those skill sets. And, all of us were doing it off the side of their desk, which we always do that. But even more so in this case, because most of the folks were doing it at a very reduced rate to make sure we could save, generate as much money as we could for Friends of Kids with Cancer. And a couple of different times it blew up, and did really well. I think that's actually that was my most successful financially. For Friends of Kids, I donated everything to them. So that was very cool along those things. It kind of definitely made me think that I need to keep doing philanthropy with my book.
That is definitely rewarding in a lot of ways. I can see that. I want to go back to something you had kind of touched on before, because I recently have finished reading both your quick start rules for the Whisper RPG as well as the Horror in the Windy City setting, which it's a pretty fantastic game supplement as far as that goes. And well, I legitimately did enjoy it. How can I phrase this? I have a special place in my heart for investigative games, and I really enjoyed what you did to kind of the base 5th edition rules to kind of take that existing chunk of text and kind of work it around to make it fit into a very fluid investigation game. I enjoyed that quite a bit, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how you did that and some of the decisions you made while doing that. That wouldn't be amiss here. Specifically, I noticed that, for instance, going from a more of a high fantasy genre of the base 5th edition rule set to something that was a bit more grounded, I noticed that you used a couple of the optional rules in the DMG for the I believe they term it gritty survivalist games. Basically, the long and short rest mechanics were altered to basically make it to where you can heal with the rest, but you heal a lot slower, and injuries tend to stick around a bit more. What decisions did you make with that, and where was that line in your mind where you decided, like, I need to keep this, but I have to let this go? And
right. So one of the things we wanted to do, so MT Black and I did a lot of that based on a lot of work I had done on my first Kickstarter, which was Landflight Sanitarium. And we wanted to keep the names of the major mechanics from the SRD, and the SRD is basically the pieces of the Dungeons and Dragons rule set that you can use commercially without an additional license from Lunsey or Hasbro. But we wanted to keep some of the terms and then just make some alterations whenever needed. So short rest, long rest, everybody knows what that is. They know what it is also when compared to each other, which is important. A short rest is half an hour or whatever, long rest is 8 hours overnight, whatever. But they know that graduation or from what you get at short versus what you get at long. So that, 1 to 2 or whatever that number is. And so we wanted to make them where the actual time that you rest in either one is actually not the most important thing. It's the thing that players focus on, of course, but from a mechanics perspective, that's not a big deal. That's very easy. It's super easy math. Say, well, they'll make the hour a day and the day a week. And again, we're keeping that proportion the same. It's very, very familiar to the DM and to the players, which is what's most important. And we wanted to do it because, again, I use that rule. For me, it was more of, and I know it's in the DMG as an optional rule, and it has been for years. I thought of it more as from like a Trail of Cthulhu, like a Gumshoe game or a Call of Cthulhu game, or Chill, or any of the other games that I've played and read and enjoyed. It's very unusual for a game to say you can wait 8 hours and you go from you've just been fried by a dragon, you're barely hanging on for dear life, you get 1 hit point. 8 hours later, you're perfect. You've had nothing go wrong with you ever, it seems like. And I think that's a common thing that a lot of DMs actually complain about. So again, that's how we took it out of there. Again, was to make it a little bit more realistic, with a little bit of a wink there with the realism part. But knowing that, again, it makes things more long term. It puts a little bit of clock on things as well, and makes it really does add resource management to the game without saying you have to worry about arrows or spells or potions or anything like that. It's like, well, now I have to worry about my life, my stamina, my hit points, which is, again, it's pretty familiar to us. Anybody that, if we're watching a movie or a show or even reading a book along those lines.
Oh, sure. Just to highlight some other features with it, largely the system takes a lot of the classes that do kind of a lot of the heavy lifting in 5e, and basically makes feats and backgrounds a lot more prominent, and it feels like a good substitution, the way that it worked out. What is it? Like I said, I haven't gotten around to playing this particular game yet, but it definitely interested me in these regards. I know that like other games that have attempted to do similar things with the base D&D rule set tend to keep the class. For instance, gangbusters. Why did you decide to avoid using class in this?
Yeah, so all the other, and I don't like using the word hack in this context, but everybody knows, like, trying to adjust myself to it. But most of the folks that go into the D&D rule system and adjust it or change it, like you said, they tend to keep the class. Again, that was something that was, MT and I both talked about this a lot and both agreed that in a more realistic game, or a game that takes place in a world similar to our own, that's probably not ideal. We also wanted to unpower. I mean, we really wanted to depower it a lot. And there's a couple different things to that. So again, once we start taking away spells, and again, spells are actually back in the system in a manner of speaking, but once we start taking away all the features that the classes get, and we're already de-emphasizing combat to a point as well, you kind of take away all that stuff. And it's not there anymore. And if you left it there, it wouldn't be necessary, or it would go ahead and go back and adjust your game back away from what your primary purpose was, which in this one was to make more of a investigation and a horror game. Another thing it does is it actually speeds up play and allows the players to focus on something other than combat. I've been playing D&D on and off since the 80s. And, I still remember with the group I played with a couple of years ago, we've been playing together every day, once a week for a year and a half, 2 years. And no matter what happened each person's turn, especially when we get higher levels, would take 5 minutes because they're like kind of overanalyzing and thinking about things and I think that's natural, because that's one of the ways, combat is emphasized in D&D a lot, because it is heroic fantasy. But the rules push you to do it. I mean, most of your meaningful decisions in D&D are around combat.
Oh yeah.
Or a spell, or if it's not directly in combat, it's something to do with like a spell or a feat or something like that. But again, it's still basically combat.
Sure. It has a very combat first approach to it, which that kind of leads me to another question in this. Because you wanted to make a very non-combat focused game, why did you choose a base system that kind of was so synonymous with the combat?
Sure. So a couple of reasons to that. One is, as I mentioned, I've been playing it for 30 plus years. So I know it. I know it really, really well.
Sure.
I know it well enough that when I make adjustments to the system, I have a decent idea what's going to happen. So that can smooth playtesting and whatnot as well. So I have an idea what happens when you remove spells, because I've played and all those things, and I have an idea of how to adjust the system to do other things. And I also do believe, and this isn't the most prevalent opinion, that I do believe the rules do a pretty solid job of things other than combat. However, the writing and the adventures that you get focus on combat. I can make a Call of Cthulhu game that is combat. I mean, I could do it if I wanted to. And the system, again, that's very lethal and it would work. And by the same rules, and they did it with Pulp Cthulhu, actually, which is much more action-oriented and survivable. But again, with D&D, and I found this with Harper's Tale, which doesn't have a lot. You can go through the entire Harper's Tale, which is 10 adventures, with probably, actually, I think you could do it without one single combat encounter. I know that was one, I'm actually positive you can do it. It takes, I think it stretches the writer and the designer to a point as well, and it has them do more. And it kind of, again, it puts the focus back on the writer and the person actually doing the story and telling the story. So again, I don't think it's actually as big a difference as folks realize. And again, that's what I hear most, like, well, why didn't you just play Call of Cthulhu? And the other reason is my players did not want to learn another game at all. I mean, I got flat out told no. I tried to trick them into it anyway, and we did play one game of Call of Cthulhu and one game of Trail. But from a other perspective, D&D has the biggest audience, easily. You know, probably more than just about everybody else combined, even with Call of Cthulhu coming up to number 2. That's a distant 2. So if I can find a way to tap into that audience, you know, that's, I saw a number the other day about the number of people that play it. If I got a fraction of a percentage, you know, I mean, like a 1/10,000th of the number of people, I could probably quit my day job, you know, because there are that many people out there. And with Critical Role, when they played Crystal Palace, yes, they played a Call of Cthulhu game, but that is a D&D crowd. And they truly loved it. That game went crazy. I mean, 1 million heads. They sold out Call of Cthulhu starter kits within like days. So I do think that the audience that plays D&D wants other games and wants other experiences. And I do think that Whispers is really, I think it's really unique in the other D&D packs and versions out there. So a little long-winded, but hopefully that kind of got you there.
No, that's a good answer. And I was just going to say that, yes, I've been noticing, how can I phrase this? I've seen editions of D&D come and go, and although some of them have kind of tried to splinter out into other genre and other attempts at this, 5th edition seems to be the one that seems to be catching on as far as different ways of play. Like, what is it? Back when I was playing Pathfinder as the de facto, they had a horror companion that they released, for instance. But I mean, I've never heard of anybody using it. I've never heard of anybody, you know, playing with it. And usually when they do, they bought it for the, you know, increased monster stats and just, you know, threw the tentacle monster inside the Lich's lair, and now he's a minion.
Yeah. So I think that's actually a fantastic point, and something that I've talked about a few other times is that in some perspectives, what a typical D&D party goes through is horrific. I mean, the body count is insane. I mean, they are walking around, they're multi-murderers. You know, one of my players had a PC that, you know, one of their little quirks was to keep track of their tick marks. And, you know, I mean, it covered an entire back page. I mean, it didn't take long. So if you're going to do horror, or if you're going to do investigation, you need to actually do horror, or you need to do that. You can't just, you know, throw a monster there, because that's what D&D is throwing a monster there. You know, we've already got vampires. We've already got Frankenstein. We've already got werewolves. We've already got everything. What you generally don't have is, again, the level of, you don't have player or characters that have consequences that last longer than 8 hours. You don't have situations where players have to make decisions that put their characters at risk permanently for either getting changed, like a sanity mechanic, or a lingering injury, or even, you know, a permadeath. And again, I think we ask folks that are, you know, great fantasy authors to make it horror, and then that to make it horror, they tend to just add vampires, or, you know, just something like that. And again, I think you can do that to a point, especially if you're kind of doing satire horror. I think that works pretty well. But if you want to do something that invokes the feel of Friday the 13th or Sing, or I'm trying to think of what else I've read or watched recently, you are going to, again, have to it's the adventure that's going to have to change. And then back we said we took away classes because again, every PC in Whispers has a D6. Period. There's no 8s, there's no 10s, there's no 12s. It's just D6. You only go to level 10, which that's not a big deal one way or the other. But again, that's where you are. You're people. You're not these superheroes anymore.
Sure. For those old enough to remember, I mean the the D&D basic books only went up to like level 9. So I mean that was when you were a standard human type character on that same like power scale. Everything past that was the expert, the champion, master, and immortal. You were, when they made the game initially with the first complete set, you could basically play until you were a literal god. The level 10 cap is very appropriate for the genre because that's basically the utmost a normal human could do.
Right.
And that feels about right.
Right. And I think a lot of it too is just discussing expectations with the players and the DM ahead of time, making sure everybody knows what they're playing, which that's gosh, I hope people do that for all games. But know what you're playing and know how the story is intended to be, at least know what the starting point is. So again, you can do these things and you can do different ways, but you can tell from a design perspective and when you're playing pretty easily if something is supposed to just be ran through, or if it's supposed to be stealthed through, or or in this case with the games that I tend to write, if you're going to have to do some more social encounters, more role playing, and more investigation, and kind of go around and try to find information that takes you to the next place for that final encounter.
Sure. And kind of going back to a point we kind of touched on, but kind of passed away pretty quickly here. Where would you say the line is for a straight up mystery and a horror game?
So very blurred. I mean, really, and that's funny you say that because I've been struggling with that too, trying to think of honestly how to market the game. Whispers. Because I think of it as genre fiction. So it's mystery, it's suspense, it's thriller, it's horror, and I don't know that many of those things are. They're definitely not mutually exclusive. So in mystery game, you would have a mystery, you would have a question, you would have something that needs to be done. You are looking for whoever, killed this person, stole that thing, did this crime, did something, and there is a question that needs to be answered. A horror game can be as simple as you get attacked and you're trying to survive. I mean, the most pure, and this is just my opinion, but like a very slasher is a very pure horror. You're a Friday the 13th or you're on Scream or something like that. There's no mystery there. I guess there's kind of a mystery who's actually doing it, but that's really not the point. The point is to try to survive.
Sure.
And that's the horror when there is, there's that big bad guy and he is going after everybody else, and you may or may not win. You may or may not survive. But in an investigation again, or a mystery, there is that thought that there is going to be a series of actions and clues and things that you can do to get to the underlying cause of everything that's going on. And then I think I even read once where a thriller is a little bit in between, where you basically have this antagonist protagonist kind of situation where they're kind of pushing things at you to see how you react and do. They're kind of manipulating the event, so you may not even know there's a question or anything. And those are good, and I really like all of them. And I don't see, I feel like most are pretty easy to do. They intermingle well, maybe.
Well, and one thing that I did enjoy with the what I read about the Whisper RPG is it had a very pulp feel to it, and I do love the classic pulp serial, everything from like a detective story to something more along the lines of John Carter of Mars. They aren't technically the same genre, but they have a very similar feel to it. And it's that the protagonist isn't, a square-jawed Superman who's out to, save the day here. It's usually normal people or fairly normal people in a spectacular situation, and they have to deal with the fallout of X.
Right. Absolutely. And so I think that's a good point, and interesting point too, because if you're, again, it kind of depends on what system you're coming from. So let's say you're coming from like straight D&D or Pathfinder or something like that. You go to Whispers, you tend to think of how underpowered they are and how little they can do. When you come from a system like Trail or Call of Cthulhu again, which are the two I tend to talk about the most, or really any of those straight horror type systems like Chill, and even some versions of Chronicle of Darkness, depending on what you do, Wizard World of Darkness, that sort of stuff. In those, it's pulp. And I think if I was looking at it from a Call of Cthulhu like power perspective, I think it's very similar in play to a pulp Cthulhu game, to be perfectly honest. I think because that's probably one of my favorite supplements of all time. I love it. And I do think that to keep players engaged, I do think you need some action on occasion too.
Sure.
Some games are fine without any action, but if the only action is the final fight that you're probably going to lose, it takes a special kind of player to play those. It's not everybody's going to want to play a game where the end result is their character dies or goes insane. So sure. Adding a little bit of pulp to it, again, adding some survivability and adding a chance where, again, if they do things right and they get a little bit lucky, they can live to fight another day. I think it's a more compelling and interesting game.
Engaging players is a big problem so far as like trying new systems. And you had said earlier that one of the reasons you went with D20 in the first place is because it was very familiar with your players. Kind of related to that, hypothetically, if somebody were more interested in an investigative leaning game, how would you pitch that to them?
Well, I would probably ask what they've played before. It's going to be my first question. And then go from there and see. Because, so Whispers, again, is D20. Cthulhu is D100. It's very easy to do. And Trail is kind of a different thing altogether because it doesn't really use skill checks. So I think that would probably be my first one. And I do think that, again, I'm writing the Whispers core book right now. It's probably not going to have a huge rules section. The section for rules is going to be pretty small. There will be a lot of examples and advice on how to use them to help the DM and help the player. But it really would be my goal with this to say, if you've never played anything before, or you've only seen Dungeons and Dragons, but that's not your genre, to be able to play Whispers with somebody handing you the character sheet and then having a DM that pretty much knows how to run it.
Sure.
And to make it I hate to say the word rules light, because like there are going to be optional rules that you can add on, like a sanity mechanic that I wrote years ago. That is not, it's intuitive, but it's not super small. It's not light. It's like 6,000 words when I cut it down as much as I can. So again, I think that's probably what I would do, and just see if and make sure, again, what's their take. If they want straight investigation, I think I know Whispers can do it. If they want horror, Whispers can do it. You can do historical fiction with it, I think, which again, horror in the Windy City has an enormous amount of actual history in it. That book was researched. And there's enough in there that if you've been to Chicago or live in that area or have lived in that area, you're gonna recognize things that are there still today in some cases.
Well, and one thing that I appreciated from that book is the care that was taken with the history. I would, aside from Harlem Unbound, I can't think of a supplement that really treated it as delicately and as faithfully without shying away from the ugly bits.
So that might be the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. So thank you. Harlem Unbound and Chris Spivey, one of the most important books that I think that we have in RPG right now. Play it or not, it's an important book. It's a great book. Chris did a fantastic job. Chris knows I'm a gushing fan of his. And that's important to me. It really, really is. With Harper's Tale, again, I told you we had 24 people. We did everything we could. We very consciously made sure that it wasn't just a bunch of 40-year-old white guys working. To be perfect, just to be blunt, that's what I am. We've got that end covered. That one's not too hard. And making sure that we have people of color, people of different genders, and just kind of LGBTQA plus and just everything. We got everybody in that we could. And in that book and in this one, the art reflects it. There are people of all sizes, races, colors, creeds, and everything else. One of the main characters in the Devil City is trans, and it's 50-50 men and women in most cases. And again, it was just really important to do that. And again, to your point, not shy away from it. I don't want to make it seem like those things didn't happen at all, but I want to make sure that I show the respect and make sure folks understand that that's not, it's just because it was happened isn't, and it's being included in the game for context doesn't mean that's what I believe or that's what I think it should be. We had probably one of the things I'm very happy, one of the things I was very proud of and happy with is Robert Greene, Dr. Greene, wrote that section on the people of color or persons of color in the late 1800s in Chicago. Robert is a professor at a university and teaches civil rights. I mean, he is a civil rights expert, and that is what he does. And he did a fantastic job of covering that stuff. And there was no way that wasn't going to be in there. And like you said, I wish more folks would do it. I think people, I think people don't think about it enough, and again, it's not easy to do. It takes a lot of effort, but it's effort that's really worth it, I think. And it adds a lot to the game.
Well, and especially with certain historical aspects, it's extremely hard to give this respect without basically beating somebody over the head with it in my mind. It's an element that's present, and you can't deny it's not present, but at the same time, you don't want that to be the centerpiece in a lot of cases. And, to kind of to segue from this, I was actually very delighted to read that when I went into the book, because I do enjoy involving actual history into a lot of games, particularly set in the appropriate era. And this has been something that I feel in a lot of cases it's been handled poorly, and that made people want to shy away from it simply because of the reaction that a lot of people had from, say, that I forget the name of the module, but it was a very problematic representation of a Native American gentleman named Testifying Cooter in a Call of Cthulhu adventure, and he was just an absolute stereotype of it, not necessarily throwing stones at anybody involved in it, but it was something that I remember the publisher had gotten a lot of flack from, and as a result, they kind of stepped away from it and then just didn't include anything with Native Americans in it for the next year or two of their publications, which I think that had the opposite effect of what they were trying to do by including something like that in the story. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's, so something we dealt with Horror in the Windy City, just researching it, was the term archival silence. I mean, it was hard to find information, very, very hard to find a lot of information. And even, Robert even mentions it when in some of there where we can't find pictures that aren't potentially offensive because they don't exist, and again, there were large neighborhoods that were freed slaves or that were African Americans or other folks, and I could find nothing other than the name of the neighborhood until the 1930s. And there were neighborhoods I really wanted to include, but I did not want to sit there and make up a page of stuff without having that information. So, I just couldn't, unfortunately. And to your point, like you said, I mean, it's something that you need to be respectful of, and I don't want to shy away from it because I do want to do other books about the South. I'm from Alabama originally. I would like to do books with an American Indian kind of basically kind of taking it as the perspective of the first peoples and doing all of that stuff too, because there's a great, amazing history and so many interesting things that we just don't know about, unfortunately. And it's we could and we should, and that's how we find out, is by doing that research and bringing it out.
From a very practical standpoint of storytelling and running games too, there's a lot of good lore and good information there that basically can make really good scenarios that I feel just kind of gets left to the side because lack of interest or people afraid to touch it. And there are certain things that are too intimate and private that you shouldn't do as an outsider. I'm not saying that you should necessarily rate every historical context, and you should definitely handle it respectfully. There's a line there, and it's sometimes hard to navigate.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, I had gotten a couple of questions from some congoers about some of the more business leanings of game design and the production thereof. First of all, question that kind of comes up a lot. So hypothetically, I got an idea for a game. I like it, obviously, because it's in my head. How would hypothetical me go out there to say okay, does anybody have any interest in animate robots in Mars, basically programmed from a historical file, so they think it's the Renaissance on Earth and they're just acting out human society there? That's my game idea. How do I know if anybody's going to like it?
Ooh, so it's going to be tough. Everything about self-publishing is tough. Everything about publishing is tough. Everything about freelancing is tough.
Sure.
It's very hard. It's a lot of work. To be honest, there's no money in it. But for some people, it's a passion, and it's something that you just want to do. And you want to get things out there for whatever reason and do whatever good you can with them. If you're looking to get into it, into game writing and game publishing, I think the first thing you have to do, unfortunately, is you do have to be involved on Twitter, Facebook, probably too, on any groups that are using the system that you're using. And if you're creating your own system, I'm going to tell you that's challenging. People have asked me, and Whispers is close to me making a system as I will ever get. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to use all the hard work that someone else and other folks have done ahead of time to make my job at least a little easier, so I can focus on the color and the evocative details and what makes it interesting to me, and not focus on the math constantly. And I'm a math person. So that would be the other thing. And is whatever system you've decided to do, go find that Discord. Discord, I'm not on it much at all anymore, but I used to be. But Discord has an enormous gamer population, and so does Twitch, of course, too. And Discord, you can go on there and you can find huge followings of folks that are like-minded. Maybe you want science fiction people, or you want anime people, or you want horror or whatever, and you can find those groups, and those groups will often have games sections or whatnot, and then you can start talking about it there. And if folks are interested, then you can grab a couple people on Discord and do a Zoom call and play a game. That's the one good thing. When I played, it was even in the 90s, and actually until recently, we couldn't play. There was no internet when I started playing. It was not easy to find people to play. You basically had to be good enough friends with them that you thought you could ask without being embarrassed. At least, when, again, that's how old I'm in my 40s, and that's kind of how it was then. So again, I think Discord is a huge opportunity. Reddit probably is. I'm not on Reddit anymore. I used to do Reddit a long time ago and decided that wasn't for me. But it's just like anything else. You have to get out there in the social media, whatever social media you have a presence in, and start pitching it and start seeing if folks are liking it and see what it is. And you may even find that the game's already out there and just needs to be tweaked. Maybe there is something like Fate. Fate's a very open-ended system. So is Powered by the Apocalypse. And there are a couple others too, where maybe I could just make slight tweaks here and there and I can get my rapier welding mechs on Mars, fighting for honor.
Hmm. I know it's not necessarily true of all or more open systems, but I do know that, for instance, the fella, I'm blanking on his name, but the guy that had published the original Apocalypse World actually encouraged people to kind of hack his game and use it for their own purposes. And I believe I remember there are a couple of versions of that he actually wrote introductions for, including Dungeon World, which it kind of like went all the way around to where it started like with him not wanting to play D&D, so he made another game, and then eventually it got
Right.
so popular that it came back to like somebody wants to play his game with D&D.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, those rules are very open. And again, I think that's something to look into too, is to make sure you understand a little bit about IP and what's open, what can be used. Because there is a lot that you can almost copy and paste and just use or reference at the very least, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel again. And everybody's a little bit different. Some people are completely open. Whomever makes Eclipse Phase, I think Eclipse Phase is completely open. Savage World has very end user friendly licensing, as far as I know. Call of Cthulhu does licensing, but they're changing their kind of process around that. It seems like a little bit. D&D does not license at all.
Yes.
And that's your I don't know. I don't know. I guess Critical Role got it, but yeah, that's not, Hasbro's not gonna chat to too many people. But again, that's the thing too, is just make sure you have an idea of what's out there to be used.
Yes, and I remember last year the basic role-playing system that Call of Cthulhu uses actually is open for a free gaming license, but I believe they include the stipulation that you can use the base D100 system, but you can't use any of the mechanics associated with their most popular game. So you
Correct.
can't use Sanity for Call of Cthulhu, or from Call of Cthulhu. You can't use the rune system from Golgotha. It's handy if you are in a group that basically uses that system a lot, and that's what but restricting in other ways. But at any rate, in this hypothetical process, I've gone on Discord. I've gotten some people excited about my Robots on Mars game, and I have it all typed out, and I'm fairly sure that it's above board as far as IP concerns are. What is my next step in this publishing process?
Yeah, so I'm going through some of this now, again, as always. And so you kind of have two options here. And you doing one doesn't mean you can't do the other. Actually, you should explore both until you have to choose. You could self-publish. In RPGs, especially, self-publishing isn't unusual. There is still a very big challenge of finding an audience. A huge challenge is to find an audience, actually. But there are self-published, and again, I'll include myself in that, products that have excellent production value and content and editing. And again, you could put them up to somebody else. We could put it up to a WotC book, and it would compare favorably. I mean, obviously the content is different, but the quality of it is fairly similar. But if you want to pitch to an established publisher or a third-party publisher, first thing you need to do is go ahead and make a list of anybody that makes a game similar to, even vaguely similar to what you have. Most folks are not going to go into a game that is a new system. It's just not going to happen. There's too many unknowns. So, if your system's D20, or if it's Pathfinder based or whatever, or it's a supplement for whatever, you can certainly ask them. And you make that list, you check their website, you make sure it's something that they would probably be interested in based on what they've already published. You make sure they're open for submissions. Not everyone says they are, but if somebody says they're not, that means they're not. Don't bother them. And then you're going to write yourself a pitch, and your pitch, a couple hundred words. It should be, like the 2-minute pitch. And again, that's actually what I'm working on here. And to be perfectly honest, Whispers, I just did my tax. Well, didn't do my tax today, but I did my rough taxes today. And we earlier spoke about how we don't make any money publishing. Horror in the Windy City cost me about, without me paying myself for anything, and I wrote well over half of it myself, about $12,000. After the Kickstarter funded and I got my portion, it was, I think I made $500 for me to write 30,000 words, do 20 pictures, edit 200 pages, do all the publishing. So again, I'm at that fraction of a penny rate. So you kind of need to realize that's there too. So, and that's why I'm actually going through this too, because I'm going to be pitching Whispers with 2 other publishers as well, to see if anybody wants the IP, because I've established it to a point. So what I am doing again is that pitch. I have a couple friends helping me with it, and we're going to pitch it to, I've got 3 or 4 people that I have a relationship with in some cases, that I know that have games similar to what I have, and that I think this fits into their portfolio or their catalog well. And that's really what you do. It's going to be challenging to find somebody that's going to take a chance on something totally new to them.
Sure.
And something else to always consider too is just to do your own little stuff with DM's Guild or Drive Through RPG. There's a bunch of community content places where you actually can use a company's IP much more freely. However, at the end of the day, usually on those sites, they actually own your product and you just get royalties on it. So that's how that's how the DM's Guild works. It's a 50-50 split. So they get, DM's Guild gets half your royalties, you get the other half. However, you can use a huge amount of Wizards IP, not just the SRD, and you even get some art that you can grab and use. So that's a way to get yourself in the door too and establish a name for yourself. Because again, actually Chaosium is point blank says, if you've never pitched anything to us, don't send us a 200-page book. They're like, it's just not going to happen.
Sure.
So don't be afraid to start small.
I think that will clarify a lot of questions that basically I'd been fielded. Now, another one that kind of comes up is collaborative work. As you had mentioned with Harper's Tale, there were about a dozen people that had worked on that in various capacities. How does a project like that start? And, again, our hypothetical, I got this robots on Mars thing. Let's hypothetically say I did most of the game design, and I need somebody to do layout, somebody to do some of the writing, something like that, short of just calling up people that how would you suggest that like-minded individuals would pursue a collaboration like that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that it can be done. And I'll just kind of think of the ones that I did as I did them. So I needed maps for one of my projects, my first project. And one of the people that I interacted with on Twitter, Dark Realm Maps, Toby, does fantastic hand-drawn maps. They're incredible. And we kind of touched base on and off. I was on his Patreon for a little while. And I reached out and I asked for a quote, basically. So if you find folks that you like, in whatever industry it is or in whatever skill set it is, if they're a cartographer, an illustrator, if they're a writer, even if they're an editor or a layout person, find those names in the books or in the products that you have and follow them on Twitter and ask. It's actually, you would be shocked at how, first off, almost everybody's incredibly nice. That's how they get their work in a lot of cases too. So this is, they will tend to take you seriously, at least at first, and not blow you off, and see what works. I would look again at people whose work you liked. And if you're able to try to get a reference, that's really hard. But one thing that you can do in collaborating is to make sure you keep it in bits, excuse me, and in kind of small pieces. And I did that with Horror in the Windy City really well, because it bit me in the bottom on some other books where I did have a lot of collaborators. Horror in the Windy City was a dozen, Harper was 2 dozen. But the writing, I made a big list, and it was on Evernote, it was on a shared doc, And basically, the writers or I assigned each section, and when they finished that section, they got the next section. So I never had one writer that required or that had more than 1,000 words outstanding.
Hmm.
Because when I have a writer that has 10,000 words outstanding, the book's on hold.
Hmm.
If I have it at 1,000 and there's 9 that aren't assigned, I know I need to do it or I need to get it to somebody else. And if somebody flakes or, and unfortunately that happens, or if circumstances occur, which also happens a lot, where that person has to do something else for his period of time, I need to be able to have them in a small enough chunk of work that I can either leave them with that and then pull the rest back and redistribute it. So again, not ever relying too heavily on a single person will help you out a lot, because everything's going to go a little slower than you think it will. And being organized, again, is incredibly important. And again, I wouldn't overextend any kind of collaborations until you really, really know somebody, because you can get yourself in a bind. I mean, I haven't gotten in too much of a bind ever, but I've been on the other end where I was working on a book with someone. So I was contracted. It was me and another writer contracted to write an adventure path, which were 100,000 page or 100,000 word book. We both got the contract. He got it a month before I did. My book was supposed to come out 2 months after his. My book came out before his first page was finished and sent. So he did eventually get canned. I didn't work for, I was a freelancer at the time, but that's something that publisher are always going to be worried about, is this collaboration. Is when you have such a huge responsibility, or you have such a huge amount of work on one person's shoulders, there's risk there too. So again, I kind of answered it in circles a little bit, but I do think collaborating is wonderful. But again, know what you're getting yourself into, be open, be honest, and realize that, again, it might happen where it just doesn't work, which I haven't had that happen very often at all, but it could certainly not work.
Sure. And time's getting a little bit away from us here. I did want to make some time for your charity efforts. Obviously, we talked about Harper's Tale a lot, but you have another one coming up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So to give the background on one of the things, like I've always done a little bit of charity work. I'm probably not much more than anybody else, to be honest with you. But on February 2nd of the year before last, my youngest daughter Harper was diagnosed with leukemia, and through that whole process, we were introduced to an amazing support network of people, and 2 organizations in particular, Friends of Kids with Cancer and Pedal the Cause, made things better for us, And I may not cry, we'll see. Friends of Kids with Cancer came in to see us when Harper was like 2 or 3 days in. We found out on a Saturday, and I think they came in on Monday, and they gave her a gift card for like $300, which every kid that comes into that ward, that comes into the oncology ward, gets a gift card and toys. And it was the first time she'd smiled in like 72 hours, at least, because she was so upset. And I always say it to them, like, you guys gave us our first good day, since the diagnosis. And since then, knowing that organization and Pedal the Cause is another one where they raise funds and donate to cancer research. And they're an organization, again, both are, of course, nonprofits. Both of them are funded completely by outside donors. Actually, Edward Jones basically bankrolls Pedal so that 100% of their donations go straight to research and grants and whatnot. And, Pedal the Cause adopted Harper basically last year. And she was there right for a child. And I mean, she got up on stage in front of like 3,000 people. Pedal the Cause is a big deal. Like they raised $3 million last year, for cancer research. And so this year, Harper was or is an ambassador for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And I'm doing something for them right now, which I'm doing a triathlon, and I'm just raising a little bit of money. But the big thing I'm doing this year is actually for St. Jude's. And again, another children's cancer, and just another children's hospital. And for St. Jude's, I'm going to be doing Whispers RPG. So I'm still going to be doing my RPG book. I'm going to do it on a platform that allows me to fundraise, or at least allows me to give a portion of the money raised to charity. So it will not be Kickstarter. Kickstarter does not allow that. I believe it's going to be Game on Tabletop is the company that does it. They're big in Europe. But 10% of all gross on the fundraiser, on the Kickstarter, or I'm sorry, on the crowdfunding project will go to St. Jude's. So we hit 20 grand, they get 2 grand. If they hit 100 grand, they get $10,000. I don't know. We'll see what it is. And that's in addition to the other fundraising and stuff that I do. You know, I do it kind of periodically where I do stuff with grants and stuff for my company to get things that way. But, you know, if you've been affected by, you know, cancer or, you know, honestly, anything, we've done, we donated everything from, was it June to the NAACP last year when, you know, the riots started really bad last summer. Every dollar I made at Drive Thru RPG for that month, because Harper wanted to do it, her and I talked about it because she owns the IP, went to NAACP, Legal Defense Fund. So again, we kind of do it all the time, and I know it's not as, I don't have a website right now because it's so far out, but I would encourage you and anybody to kind of look at what kind of organizations you like and try to find folks that support them and support them however you can. I mean, a share, a like, a comment, a tweet, a post, everything makes a big difference to us because we can't get people to see it. When Harper's Tale, I had books to sell to give them their last couple $1,000. I had 100 books, I think. Matt Mercer from Critical Role, I just threw it out there. I tag him all the time, not too much anymore. I'm like, maybe Matt will see this and we'll see what happens. He did. And I sold out of 100 books in 6 hours. And then people went to Drive Thru RPG anyway to buy them directly from me and Harper. And that was the biggest month I've ever had on that platform. And it all took was a couple of the Critical Role fans liking it and commenting it, and then it coming to his notice. So again, I think, you know, for me, St. Jude's is going to be the biggest one I'm doing this year, of course, LLS, but I'm almost done with that. And I do feel that forever, I will probably always donate, you know, 10% or tithe or something to those organizations just because they do such good work. And the gaming community has been incredibly supportive of that. I mean, actually, WotC actually gave us stuff to donate. WotC even put it up on their website. Once I funded, they put it up at the D&D, one of the D&D websites. And that day that was my best day, actually.
Oh, yeah. The, what is it? The exposure's, what is it? Really great for events like these. Word of mouth helps out a lot. So I'm hoping that, what is it? Our limited platform can help you with that. What is it? Jordan Con, I believe our donations usually go through to the Mayo Clinic, but by all means, you know, this is something that is a very good cause as well. I usually like to promote that sort of thing whenever we have a guest that I know is active in it. Before we go here, how would people basically get a hold of you? What are the normal social media platforms that you usually hang about if people are interested in your work, or be it charity or just a new product for the Whisper RPG?
So I'm on Twitter. That's one I'm mostly on. I have an Instagram, but I'm never on it. I have a Facebook page that is woefully neglected. So I actually ask folks to follow me on Twitter. I'm at Matthew D. Corley. That's MATTHEWD like dog, Corley, CORLEY. And I'm there pretty regularly, and that's actually how I do most of my communications. I do need to reset my mailing list because I just got rid of my website. Pinching pennies. But, you know, that's where I am, and I'm always happy to hear people and ask questions and talk to people. You know, if you're a Drive Thru RPG and you've ever bought anything of ours, and people ask me questions there all the time about the books. Actually, a couple of my books have these huge, like, threads of people asking questions and talking about it, and I really enjoy that interaction. So please, anybody that needs anything, you know where to find me on Twitter.
That sounds like a plan. And what is it? I'd like to thank you for your time today. I've enjoyed this conversation very well, and I hope you have too, sir.
I have. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. What is it? And for all the viewers, thank you for watching.
Thank you.